All right. We'll wait just a second here. We'll wait for everybody to get in. All right. Well, welcome everybody to Ty's live webinar on operational gaps that slow brokerage growth. My name is Nate Ivie. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships here at Ty, and I'm joined by Walter Mitchell. Walter, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Walter Mitchell, CEO at Ty Software. I've been in the freight industry for a little over 20 years now, mostly working with freight brokerage during that time and always on the technology side. So I've spent my career trying to help freight brokers be more efficient and build their good solutions through technology. And working with Ty, we've been focused on that operational excellence here as well.
Awesome. And then we're also joined here by Dave Stone. Dave, if you want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, guys. My name is Dave Stone, Senior Director of the Freight Brokerage at WSI Freight Solutions. Joined WSI in April of 2025. Been building out this brokerage, but I've been in this business for many, many years, building out different stages of brokerages, both on the public space as well as the private side.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I think it's pretty safe to say that freight's been through a pretty tough few years, and most brokerages have had to focus on survival and stability. But one thing we're seeing right now is that while the market's starting to stabilize, a lot of operations are still running on systems and processes that were built for a lot slower version of this industry. What's interesting is that many of these gaps aren't obvious. They don't necessarily break the business. The freight still moves, customers still get served. But over time, those small inefficiencies will start to compound. They start to slow down decisions, create extra work for teams, and make growth harder than it needs to be. So the goal for today's conversation isn't to talk about technology for the sake of technology. It's really about operational clarity. Where are the hidden gaps that quietly cost brokers every day? And what will we do to modern brokerages to do differently to close these gaps? We'll walk through a few key areas where this tends to show up in quoting and pricing and speed, visibility and tracking, and how operational workflows either help or hinder growth. And most importantly, we'll talk about what this actually looks like in practice instead of just saying it. So with that, let's go ahead and start by setting the stage. So the market's definitely survived some tough years, right? But brokers are still running on systems built for a slower version of the business. Where are the operational gaps that most brokers don't realize are quietly costing them every day? And why do these gaps go unnoticed? Mitch, we'll start with you.
So these gaps end up building up in your business and they go unnoticed because as the years go by, some of these processes don't really change and evolve. We don't necessarily always take the time to update our processes to match the changes in the business that we're working with. So what we end up doing is we see these processes that seem like they're really good when we put them in place, and then a few years later they're still just fine, and a few years later they're okay, but they've been the way. And making that change or standing still ends up being a little bit easier of a path. So this is where all these things creep in to inefficiencies. And when we think about processes, nobody's ever created a process and been like, look, this is going to be the worst process that this company's ever seen. Like that never happens, right? That's not what we do. But after a few years, sometimes it does become the worst process we've ever seen. And it's because the business is changing around us and we're not updating our process in real time to keep up with that. So they creep in there, sneak in, and slow us down incrementally.
Yeah, and sometimes brokers don't even, they normalize the friction without even realizing it because the freight still moves.
Right.
Dave, how do small inefficiencies compound over time?
Yeah, I think Mitch hit it solid to start with, which is you don't ever set out to say, I want this process to be the worst process ever. But I think that what happens is you get this death by 1,000 cuts type of environment, right? Where it usually starts out with, well, I'll just do it this one time since I need to do this to satisfy this part of the customer request or this part of the process. And eventually that one time turns into two times. And then it turns into, well, that was pretty easy. Let me keep doing that. And by the end of it, you're left with a spreadsheet that has all of these numbers on it. You update it every once in a while. When you remember, you're trying to bounce multiple things back and forth as you kind of go through the process. And by the time you look at this, you're a completely inefficient process, but it's really hard to change at that point because now that's the process that you have in play. And that's how you've trained people. And that's what your business is built on. So I think when I start looking at things like that, it usually starts with fantastic intentions. We need to satisfy that for the customer. We're gonna go super fast to do this for the customer. And by the end of it, you end up with a process that probably doesn't allow you to scale and probably doesn't allow you to grow at the level that you want to grow without experiencing some amount of hiring or inefficient process to allow you to grow to that level.
Dave, I love what you said, the death by 1,000 cuts. And teams spend more time gathering that information instead of being able to act on it because it's just everything that they've known. So, Walter, what impact do these hidden gaps have on growth?
Some showed up in my feed the other day that was talking about that the death of a company comes from growth. And I thought that was, very like clickbaity, but also valid. And it ties into, like Dave was saying it too, is the inefficiencies come in when we don't notice them. We have good intentions. We had great ideas on why this is going to go here and be added, but they don't necessarily scale, or that thing we put in place is maybe not really ideal for the overall business in the longer term. Maybe it should have been there for a short period of time. And so I think that the real thing that comes from that is growth is challenging for businesses. The things that you can do when you have two or three brokers running this segment or that part of the business is not the same that you can do when you have 10 or 15 or even more, right? And even adding one person into the process can really change the way that you strategize, the way you work together. Like Dave was mentioning, Excel files, right? You're keeping these things in Excel files. Well, how do you share that amongst 2 people? Well, how do you share that amongst 6 people? And who's keeping it updated? Who takes ownership of it? These things need to change over time. And that's where it impacts the business the most, is as you grow or change or adapt, the processes have to grow, change, and adapt to match the business. And if you don't do that, that's where it really costs you.
Yeah, growth should create leverage. But what we see a lot of the time is, instead of using updated processes that help improve margins and other things, the team just ends up working harder to get it done. And it can lead to complacency and all sorts of other stuff. So, Walter, when you talk to brokers, what's the most common thing that they normalize that they shouldn't?
The most common thing they normalize that they probably shouldn't, I would say, is some of the processes that end up being specialized to a specific customer, right? And you end up taking these processes where you have something that one customer is really looking for and build those in so that they're universal across your whole system. Or also another one that ends up being normalized is where you have special cases, and those special cases end up becoming the way. So what I mean by that is, and we ask this question all the time when we're going through onboarding with customers or working with them, is what percentage of time does this happen? And maybe that's something like, we'll use hazmat as an example. Maybe you only move 1% of your shipments are hazmat. So that's fine. Like, let's make a special process for those 1%, but let's not put the processes that are special for hazmat into the 98% of our other process. And that's an area where normalization can really be a challenge. And I use hazmat because it's an obvious one. Like, bad stuff happens if you don't take care of hazmat. But it can also apply to heavy haul. It can also apply to high value cargo. It can also apply to even specialized equipment like flatbeds. It depends on how frequently you do it, but don't try to solve a 1% case across the 100% of your business. That's where normalization can hurt you.
Love it. And Dave, I believe you've been in this industry, forever. In fact, there was word that you maybe brokered your first load when you were 10. I don't know. Anyway, you've seen a lot of change. You've seen a lot of comes and goes, peaks and valleys. Why do you think brokers accept good enough when it's limiting?
Because I think at the end of the day, right, what we do as brokers is we're really good at the firefight, right? I mean, that's a lot of what quote unquote good brokers on the floor do, right? Is that tough load to cover, that customer that has a ton of requests, we're able to jump in and solve that, right? We're problem solvers. That's why we love this industry, is because no 2 days are the exact same. I think what happens though is that we forget every time that we do that is time spent away from doing the things we should be doing, right? How do we engage with more customers? How do we bring on more freight? How do we find better margins, or how do we find better carriers? All of those things that go into kind of the growth of the business, we kind of push to the side because we turn around and say, well, I need to go solve this right now. And then we build out the process, just like, was just mentioned, right? We build out this 1% exception, and we try to build that for everything, not realizing that we're actually taking away from other things. And so I think when you look at, why do we accept this? Well, because it starts small and we build into it, and then we turn around and we say, well, that's got to be it. And by the time we realize that that's got to be it turns into that's limiting, we're now at the point where I can't change because I'm going to break multiple things and my customers are going to be upset. So I might as well just keep going. And that's usually where you end up in this nasty do loop of, well, I'll just hire people to do this basic stuff for me since I don't have enough time to do this for everybody, versus turning around and saying, what else could I be doing instead of this? And what will it take for me to not just accept good enough and actually build out the right process that allows me to be efficient, which in turn should allow you to grow. And by growth, you start to talk about margins and all those different things that they kind of come with the fun part of being able to have a successful brokerage.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like when things are working, change feels risky, especially when the freight's still moving. But sometimes the biggest risk isn't changing, it's staying the same. So I really appreciate that. Walter, how does maintenance mode thinking show up in operations?
Yeah, I think also to kind of add on to what Dave's talking about there, it's amazing how often that Eisenhower matrix comes in, which is we spend all of our time on the urgent, important items that come up. I think that's like Freight Broker 101. Never miss a phone call, always take care of the problems. And it's important. It's a key part of brokerage, but we can't forget to spend time on the important, not urgent as well. And that's that ties into like, when does maintenance mode happen? You end up building in these workflows or these manual processes because you put them in place while you're under fire. You put them in place while, look, this truck's been stolen. It's going the wrong way. I never ever want to see my team do this again. And that becomes process. Well, that's not the right way to do it, right? That's not when you put process in place. You need to get out of that urgent, important mode, get into the mode where you can look at the process overall and strategically build a process that fits the whole workflow, instead of putting a manual step in place to react to urgency. And then as you do that, you end up, if you do it the wrong way, you end up with things like scattered data. You end up being very reactive to your decision-making process, because maybe that stolen load was a one-off, but maybe you have a systemic problem. You got to catch your breath a little bit before you take that step and say, like, is this systemic? Is this a one-off? Am I building a manual workflow for this? Should it be a manual workflow? Like, these are all things that you got to take a step away, get into strategic mode instead of maintenance mode when you start tackling them.
And Dave, when you get out of the maintenance mode and into more of the strategic mode, what shift have you seen happen when brokers stop normalizing inefficiencies?
Yeah, I think that the one piece I just want to add on to it is, I think in brokerage life, we often celebrate those immediate actions, and we celebrate the ability to quickly resolve that. And we almost high five each other at that point, versus thinking about it in a different manner, which is, I just had a issue occur, and is that issue related to something we're doing or not doing? And what is really the solve going to be, so I don't have to go through this fire drill again? And I think that's the piece that we often forget about, is that after action report of pulling back and figuring out what it actually takes. And to the point of, maybe it was a one-off and maybe it was something you couldn't prevent. Those are things that you shouldn't plan for. Those are things that are going to occur, and you should at least have contingencies in place. That's the definition of a contingency plan. But the planning and the strategic piece is the piece that we should celebrate more of, because that's the piece where if everything went well and everything worked as it's supposed to do, your customers are actually going to be happier, and your customers are actually going to give you more freight because you're not going through the chaos and you're not trying to work around all these different things to solve a problem. Your people are probably going to be happier because they don't have to jump through hoops to solve this piece on a day-to-day basis. Your business runs better. Naturally, the margins come with that. I mean, that's why we're in this business is there is a component where we still have to make money at the end of the day. And so I think when you stop normalizing that inefficiency and you start to get into, I need to strategically set this up so that every time one of these things comes up, I don't turn around and turn into a firefighter. I can actually allow my business to do what it's supposed to do. That's where you start to really see the growth that occurs inside of this. And I think, that's hard. That's really hard, especially when we've been in this environment where it's fun to be a firefighter. It's fun to get that high five or that pat on the back when you solve that, especially from a customer that says, I didn't know how you were going to do that. But the better piece is, hey, Mr. Customer, I've solved the strategy that it's going to take to run your business effectively for the next 3 years. Nobody's going to say that, but that's really what a customer wants is, I don't want to have to go through this again.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, Dave. Like it kind of goes against the principles of who we hire as brokers as well, right? Because we bring people in and we do celebrate that firefighting ability or that ability to make it happen. But then you're absolutely right. Like we want to shift it and make it so that, how do you put in processes that make it so we don't see the fires, but still celebrate the ability to get things done as well as celebrate the strategy? Like that's a tough problem to solve.
Yep.
It is. And before we hop into the next talking point, which actually is a nice transition from what we've been talking about, I just want to remind everyone this is live. We are answering questions live in this webinar. So if you have any, feel free to throw them in the chat. We'd love to answer them. But let's switch gears here. Let's talk about what modern actually means in this context. What are the specific things that high-performing brokerages are doing that others aren't? So Walter, why do some brokerages operate with more clarity and speed?
So I'm a technology guy, right? So whenever I think about this, I always lean in on the technology side as well. And part of that is I don't think you can operate effectively as a modern broker without good tech to support you. Now, what does that mean? Shameless promotion. It means having a good TMS, right? It means having a TMS that's going to support you, because that TMS should be your single source of truth. It should be your orchestration layer. It should be the place that's helping you make decisions in context. And in today's world of technology, we're not a single application world. We're in a world where we have many applications that are supporting us, like tools for fraud management, tools for visibility. We need to bring all of that information, and pricing for that matter, bring all of that information together into a system of truth or a system of action that you can use to help make decisions in context. That's what modern brokers are required to do. You have to be able to have all of the information you need in context when you're making it, so that you can help solve the problem, that you can help move to the next step, you can help get that freight moving forward. All of these things happen if you have a single source of truth and access to real-time data.
We hear this all the time, right, Walter? Like, I need something faster. I need this. I need more visibility. Speed in brokerage usually starts with visibility, right? So
absolutely,
it all correlates. Dave, how do integrated systems change your daily operations?
Yeah, I think when I start looking at this, when you're going to build out a brokerage, right? The thought process is that, or it has been that, if I have a solid old school operator, he can teach everything, he can tell everybody how to do it, he knows it all, we go to him, he's great, right? I think the problem that you run into is that just doesn't scale, and it doesn't work for today's environment. Number one, you got to be able to bring new people in, and they got to be able to understand things quickly, right? So how do I get them up to speed and get them operational quickly? So that's the first piece. The second piece is, if somebody leaves, do you have the ability to manage that customer, manage that carrier base, manage their lanes, manage whatever piece that they were touching? Can you do that when they leave? And I think when you start to look at those components, single source of truth definitely comes out. Like, everything has to be in one location that anybody can access it at any given time. And then I think the other piece of that is having the ability to understand what is inside there, getting rid of, we brought it up in the first piece, getting rid of those Excel spreadsheets that live in somebody's computer that may or may not be available when they are out. I think you get rid of those. You have that single source of truth. You have the ability to see everything that's going on inside of the system. Now the ability to have the faster decisions, the ability to process issues faster, the ability to understand your business a lot better becomes almost table stakes for what's required inside of brokerage today. And I think if we've learned anything over the past couple of years, the market is shifting, what's going on, what's happening. You have to understand your business to the nth degree to be able to be successful and be able to do what you need to do inside of this current market. And you can't do that unless you have these systems all integrated. So I talk about it all the time, where I want the ability to go into the system and know everything about a customer, everything about their lanes, their margins, what's going on with them. Anything that affects that customer, I should be able to go in and see that information very easily without having to go to, Johnny or Susie or whoever and ask the questions on that. It should be inside the system. And that's really where that integrated component comes in and allows us to change our operation to be more effective and efficient.
Yeah, when the system works cohesively, the team works cohesively. Right. So let's stick with you, Dave. I'm curious. I'm putting you on the spot here, but what competitive advantage have you seen that creates?
Yeah, I think my team hears me say this all the time, but speed wins in this environment. And I think that shippers want more speed. Carriers want more speed. Everybody is in it for speed. And you really can't have the level of speed if you're bouncing from multiple different platforms and multiple different environments, whether that is quoting or whether that's pricing or whether that's where is my truck and do I have the visibility? None of that is available unless you have kind of this integrated component. So when we talk about, competitive advantage, at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is we're trying to win more freight at good rates so that we can go off and quote unquote get a better margin. And you can't do that if you're telling a customer, hey, wait a couple hours, I got to price this out, I got to go do X, Y, Z before I can get back with you. Shippers want to know right now, can you cover this? They want to know what your rate is. They want to know when your truck's going to be there, right? And all of those things happen in a matter of minutes now, more so than they have in any other part of this business. And I think that's really where the competitive advantage is. If I can answer a shipper's question, can I cover it, right? Yes or no? Do I have a carrier that's available? When can they be there? What's my rate on that? If I can answer that in the same time frame that they're sending me emails or calling me or engaging me, I win more freight, I grow the business, and we continue to move on and scale effectively.
That's well said, Dave. And I think one of the things I'd add on to that is when you talk about speed and going through the process, when you have these systems integrated, it allows your team to actually look at all those steps and execute the steps the way you want them to. Whereas when you have disparate systems and you ask them for speed, the answer you're going to get is, I'm going to skip steps.
Mm-hmm.
And the steps they end up skipping are probably the ones you care about. Like, oh, I'm not really going to check to verify we got the right credentials for this carrier. Or, it's fine that I don't really have the right MC number for them. I'll get that later. Those skipping steps, yeah, they make you fast, but they cost you later. So if you bring these things together, you get that speed that Dave's talking about. You get that quote right when the customer needs it, but all that information in context allows you to win without skipping steps and still protect yourself and handle all the key pieces that brokers need to handle.
Yeah. And I mean, speed to quote's definitely one of the biggest differentiators right now, but let's talk about where brokers typically lose time in the quoting process. Well, why does slow quoting cost more than just the lost load? Dave?
Yeah, I think, number one, a lot of shippers today are probably sending off quotes to hundreds of thousands of brokers, right? So you're not the only on unless you've built some relationship where you're getting first dibs on that piece. So let's call it what it is, that you are a fish in a giant pond and you're trying to win the freight just like everybody else is, right? And whether that's an email version of a quote or whether that's a portal, I've actually seen portals where the load is posted, the email comes out, and in a matter of minutes, you go in to actually bid on the quote inside the portal. The load's gone because they got the rate that they wanted. They're moving on, right? That is the level that we're at right now. And I think that, number one, we're all fighting for freight, right? I mean, the market is what it is, and the amount of freight that's out there has not increased to the level that allows for you to take the amount of time that maybe you could have done in the past. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece is, from a customer perspective, they are probably moving very quickly because this freight may have just come in. This freight may need to move quickly. This freight may be a hot load that maybe somebody forgot to do something. And so you ultimately damage that customer relationship when you turn around and don't provide them that quote quickly and they have to go to somebody else. You may have lost that customer maybe for the foreseeable future. And I think that's a piece that starts to show itself when you do take time and try to do, it takes additional pieces to go off and quote this piece. And then the third piece on this, right, is I think that it's not just the slow quoting. I think that it shows something else to a shipper when maybe you take a long time and then all of a sudden the quote that you provide is not correct. It's bad data. It's too high. It's something that they weren't expecting. And now that creates an additional rift between you and the customer. And I think that piece starts to pull away the opportunity to even quote in the future. And so when we start talking speed, it is speed, but it's speed in an effective manner that allows the customer to know you actually know your business and that you can actually do this stuff correctly and have the right amount of data behind it that allows you to actually then turn around and go cover the freight, and you're not coming back to the customer asking for additional money because you know your business and you know what the rate should be.
Yeah, going back to the fish analogy, I look at it as what's in your control and what's out of your control. What's out of your control is there's other fish. What's in your control is how to be a more enticing fish, right? Investing in the technologies. How do disconnected systems slow down pricing decisions? Walter, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, and I'm going to build on what Dave's talking about here, in the speed to quote piece is a key piece of it, and that's when you're working with speed to quote, sometimes if you have to jump between tools, if you don't have all of the information you need to make decisions in context, if you don't demonstrate that you understand your business well, like these are all components that fall into the how you deal with it. And one of the things that I think is an interesting component in this story is, we being the technology provider, we've been working with an email AI tool for about 5 years. And one of the things that we did initially is, a few years ago, if you had the time to quote for a truckload shipment at 30 to 40 minutes, that was considered somewhat acceptable and like an okay thing. And what we found at that point, when we started processing some of these emails, and our customers could respond in a few minutes instead of 30 to 40 minutes, they would win a significant amount of additional freight, usually in the range of about 30% additional win rate. That's pretty tremendous. By shortening the quote time, you don't even have to have a better price. You just had to be there faster. Now, times evolved a little bit, and fast forward to today. Well, today, we can take a look at something like C.H. Robinson. They're a little bit on the big side of a brokerage, but C.H. Robinson has implemented tools where they used to only reply to 60% of their quotes. So 40% of their quotes, 4 out of 10 would just not get replied. And then on that, it would take an average of 20 minutes to reply. Today, they're replying in 3. So they're one of the largest brokers, and the table stakes for them is they reply to every single quote that hits their desk, and they do it in less than 5 minutes. So that's table stakes now. If you can't do that, then you're not even putting yourself in a position to compete on that load. And that's where the speed really has an impact, is if you need to make sure that you have all that data together, you need to make sure that you have real-time visibility. You need to make sure that you have automated workflows so you can get these things out quick enough that you can compete with the rest of the industry.
Yeah, let's be clear. It's not just about rates. Like that misconception has been proven, right? It's about access to up-to-date information, speed in general, but also workflows and how your team is going to use them.
Yeah, time is very critical. And then also professionalism. Dave hit on it a little bit earlier too, but demonstrating that you know what you're talking about. Make sure you don't miss when things are hot. Make sure you don't miss if it's temperature controlled. Right? We got to make sure we're doing this accurately, but fast.
Yeah. The one piece I was just going to add to that, because I think it's super critical. And I know, we brought up CH. I'll do it from the small brokerage perspective, right? So on a small brokerage, oftentimes your only opportunity to engage with this customer is based on some of this quoting ability, right? I mean, you can talk to small brokerages and their sales folks are high-fiving each other when they get on a list to be able to quote, right? So there's no relationship there. The customer doesn't want to engage from a relationship piece. They just want a price, give them a price, and they'll let you in. The piece on that is, if that's your only opportunity to engage with a customer, and you know that it's based on speed, and you know it's based on they're not looking at anything else at this point, but your ability to provide that and then service that and have all of the necessary information behind it in terms of carrier and fraud and visibility and all of those things that kind of integrate directly with that quote. Now, all of a sudden, that one stop or that one point where you got to talk to that customer on a rate conversation now turns into, hey, we got a new RFP that's coming up. Would you guys like to participate? And that's how you parlay that into actually building the relationship with the customer, right? Spot leads to contract, contract back to spot. Like that piece can be very, very beneficial to small brokerages, just based on the ability to quickly quote, have the information behind them, and be able to provide that to that customer at that given period of time, versus maybe taking a long time and now the opportunity is completely gone away and that customer knows no different, knows that, hey, you bid on something, but you're super late, and they've already given it to one of the other big brokerages.
Yeah, that's a great point, and one that I think some of the smaller brokers don't take advantage of enough, because there are a lot of us are smaller brokers, and a lot of us are trying to compete against some powerful players out there and win and pull more of those fish. But build in that relationship management and relationship building into those processes and even into your workflow automations. It's a good action item that I think everybody should take away, is that don't just send back a price when you send back the quote. Send back something that adds value to the customer as well. Send back a message that goes along with it. Send back the point that we've got carriers already selected. We've handled the fraud prevention side. Add something to your message. And even if you automate what you're adding, but make sure you're adding enough that differentiates you, and take that opportunity to sell your services and make sure you're showing, like, this is why I'm better and why I'm more valuable. This is the thing that separates my brokerage from the 36 other emails you got that are all going to be within $100 on pricing. This is your opportunity to take advantage of that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you had all three of us mentioning fish in this webinar, you can cross that off of your Thai bingo card. So Perfect. Go ahead and do that now. No, Dave, let's dive in a little bit deeper though. You have experience with this firsthand. So how has quoting speed changed your competitive position? Why was speed a priority for your team?
Yeah, I think, obviously at the end of the day, the ability to win freight is what we're doing, right? I mean, I'm competing against big brokerages. I'm definitely not in that realm in the current brokerage space. But when I look at in terms of success on this, I mean, you're going to look at number of loads, right? And I was actually just running through a report this morning based on information inside of Thai, which I'll tie that piece back. But just looking at what we've been able to bid on, what our win percentage is, and the amount of volume that we've been able to get off in the past week with a new customer on a lot of the same tactics that we're talking about right here. You're talking about going from 0 to 30 loads in a matter of a single week, just based on the information that we're kind of going over here, right? And that's the piece that is the success for us. So I think that's the first piece. The second piece, though, is When we start talking about that customer component, customers, this is almost expected from customers now. And so you almost find yourself in this space where if you're not doing this, you're behind the 8 ball. And so it's allowed us to operate in the same space that a lot of these other big brokerages have been able to operate in for a long period of time. And then the third piece is, I think the piece for us is because of the process that we've set in place in terms of how we respond to quotes, what that quote looks like, how we respond to customers on that, you're seeing an efficiency piece that it doesn't matter who is touching that given customer on that given day. The ability for us to do it in the same exact manner allows that customer to see a very similar response and a similar speed on that piece that allows the customer to know that, we're not just a fly-by-night kind of brokerage. We're actually doing this with thought and strategy behind how we're actually approaching a given quote for a given customer.
So when you were going through the realization of what the true cost of standing still was, what were the first few steps you did to address that gap?
I think, when you start to look at things that are sitting out there that are costing you more, the first thing you have to look at is labor, right? How much labor am I spending to do the things that I know I could be doing in a much more efficient manner? And so what do you typically do with that, right? What do we do with labor? We typically say, work harder, do more. I need you to do this better. I need you to remember to do this. I need you to set a reminder to do this. And that's not efficient, and that doesn't allow for any ability to actually scale. And so you start to peel that piece back to say, well, if labor is my bottleneck and I know that I'm not going to go higher more on this piece, where else can I get the efficiency that I need to get? And so that's where you start to look at the integrations and you start to look at the ability to bring things in-house to the point where, do I have some workflow automation that I can push out such that I'm not having to remember to send that or having to remember to engage on this piece? It does it for me. Do I have integration that allows me to do some of those manual things that maybe I'm doing in the background that would normally cost in labor dollars, that I can actually have the system go off and do? And do I have the ability to provide a tool that allows my team to onboard quickly so that if I do bring in labor, I don't have to take as long to onboard that labor as maybe I would have in the past with other tools and integrations?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you did implement those workflow automations and those integration improvements, what results did you see?
Yeah, I think the immediate piece is the level of the level of trying to figure out what we had to do or how to do it or who was supposed to do it. Those things go away. The system does it for you. And I think you get more into exception management than you do in terms of remembering to do the actual process. So let's say that 90% of the things that you had to do are done in a very robust, efficient manner, and you're managing 10% that maybe there was an issue or maybe that requires additional eyes or additional support on. That's much easier to go off and manage to, and it creates a much better environment for your folks to go off and be successful. And I think that you see it at the point now where you are doing the thought process that goes into making the business better and making the business run more effectively, because you're no longer doing quote unquote the busy work or the work that you had to remember to do, and that if you didn't remember that something would happen or something would occur, that goes to the side, and now you're able to focus on the main thing, right? And you're able to build out the thing that has to be built out to allow the growth.
You mentioned a couple things in there that are really critical in the process, and one of them is that onboarding new people and the amount of energy that you have to put into onboard new people, and how that is so much more helpful when you have a centralized system. But then also you're talking about operational efficiency and making your team more efficient. And that's one of the areas that I would add that's a challenge in staying still, is that if you don't keep up with these, you do get caught a little bit behind. But these steps add value in challenging markets and in growing markets. And one of the areas that I've seen from the technology side that's a little interesting is in a challenging market, we see larger brokers spending more time updating technology than smaller brokers. But in a growing market, it's kind of the opposite. The larger brokers are a little less mobile in their technology stack, but the smaller ones are changing it often. And I think what happens there is, as a small broker, you get pushed into this growth paradigm where you get stuck and you can't grow anymore. You've got processes that are broken, and you're fixing a process as it's breaking or degrading. Whereas when you're a little bit bigger of a broker, regardless of whether or not you're in a challenging market or a strong market, the need for efficiency is always there. And that need for efficiency to take a step back and be strategic about finding where can I improve specific parts of my process is always a valuable exercise to have. And I think it's a lesson we can learn from the larger mid-sized brokers, is that we should think about our business in all markets, strong, slow, but staying still is never going to be a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the piece that is super important on that is, when we talk about growth, we typically think of growth as only adding customers and adding volume and adding loads and adding margin. And while that is growth, and that definitely, from a board perspective, the board definitely wants to see that level of growth. But I think the other side of it is that cost to execute and that ability to actually do things in a cheaper manner, and I don't mean cheaper by just purely pulling down the cost. I mean being able to service a customer with less total touches and less total folks that are engaged on that. That's obviously going to lead to the total bottom line, and there's a growth component in that. And I think you brought up CH, and I think CH has done a lot of that, where they've turned around and they've figured out that there is more effective and efficient manner to do this piece in. And being able to do that is obviously, driving the total bottom line. And I think we lose sight of that at the end of the day, because we think, well, I added new customers, I added more margin, like this is growth. I think you need to think about it in terms of what's it actually take to actually service that single load, and am I doing it in the most effective manner?
Yeah, eventually you start changing your mindset from how many loads did I manage to how efficiently did I manage these loads. And as you make that evolution as a business, you start valuing it a little bit differently. And we definitely see that a lot. It's a good way to measure the maturity of a business, is which one you're measuring. Are you measuring a shipment count as your barometer of success, or are you measuring the efficiency of your business?
Yeah. Let's talk through some more operational efficiencies here, and where these gaps are showing up. There's a lot of brokers that are still making manual check calls despite having different types of tracking technologies. Automation doesn't remove visibility, it improves it. So why are we still seeing these gaps persist? Why do brokers default to manual check calls, Walter?
Manual check calls are, I think, something every broker has to deal with, right? There's always going to be challenges. And it's an area where we have a lot of opportunity for automation, but not 100%, right? I don't know that we get to 100% removal of check calls, but we should get really high into that category. Because, I mean, if you think about it, the brokers don't want to make the calls, and the carriers don't want to receive them, right? It's on both sides. It's one of the neat things that I saw at the broker carrier summits, which are a really great conference where you get carriers and brokers in the same room and having some really exciting conversations. Yeah. It's the unanimous topic. Stop making check calls. Stop it. Both sides are saying it. But if both sides are saying it, then where's the gap? And the gap is that the information isn't there. The information's not being shared. And if the information was being shared, we wouldn't need to make the check calls. So why do we want to do this? Why do we care so much? Because we can make both sides better if we take steps to eliminate check calls. And we can do that using visibility tools. There's tons of visibility tools that are out there. We just need to make sure that both sides understand how important it is to keep them enabled, keep them active, and continue tracking the load from start to finish. We can do it by setting up triggers and automations that help us identify when tracking stops or when tracking is off track or when we break a geofence. We can set up automations to help us understand when a load's running late, when something's going awry with it. And then when those happen, that's when we should start leaning in on text messaging, emailing, and then even some of our AI robocalls, that can be done are a good way to supplement it. And then finally, at the end, then let's rely on the humans for the manual check calls. But after we've covered these other steps first, and save a whole bunch of time and energy.
Yeah, and what kind of benefits does that create for both brokers and carriers?
The benefits: improved relationships for one. It's definitely makes life a lot better when we're not irritating each other, and showing each other value, right? So better relationships for sure. And then time on both sides. We're saving both sides a tremendous amount of time and energy when we don't have to make those check calls. And it's also bad time, right? So I'd rather spend some of my time doing happy things or important things of the business than the things that are tedious and a little bit annoying. And then it also gives us the ability to be more proactive when we're bringing information to customers. The customer doesn't have to call us as often asking for updates on the load. If we have the information more straightforward, more collected, and we're sharing it with our customer, it allows that whole chain to eliminate so much extra work in the process and allows us to focus on some of the challenges. And I'll bring it back to an earlier piece of then we end up being that hero again, right? Where we run into the fire. We have the time to spend on the fire because we're not having to worry about those other shipments.
Yeah.
And then we're going to have less fires because all those shipments are running along smoothly and we know about it ahead of time. So those are all a bunch of the benefits that come from closing the gap on manual check calls and making sure that you're being proactive on how you're gathering information and sharing it.
Walter, we have a question in the chat from Joanna. Can we get more information on how to set up workflows for check calls?
Yeah, we love helping people set that up. Assuming that Joanna's a Thai customer. If you're not a Thai customer, you should become a Thai customer first, of course. But then absolutely, there's some great ways to set up workflow automations in Thai that help alleviate the check call process. You can bulk send text messages to drivers, emails to drivers, or to dispatchers, however you need to. And we're always happy to help set that up and have conversations with our customers to be their technology partner. Because that's one of the things that we know for sure is that as a broker, you get busy handling the day-to-day freight. You get busy handling your business, dealing with the fires, dealing with customers. You don't always have the time to be great at technology, but that's what Ty's here for, is to be your technology partner and help explain that to you.
Dave, I'd love to turn it over to you. How has reducing check calls on your side changed your team's daily workflow?
Yeah, I want to add on a couple things because I'm super passionate about the elimination of check calls, and I actually want to take it even further upstream. I think most brokerages that you go into, what's the first thing you are taught to do when you're a first new person inside of operations? Go make check calls, right? Go engage with the carrier. Yeah. And so I almost think that there's this weird underlying culture component inside of brokerage that says, you have to make check calls before we'll teach you anything else. And whether that's talked about or not, you see it in every single brokerage across the board. And I think the adage is, right, carriers hate it, right? Because what typically happens, you call the carrier at 8 o'clock in the morning. He's been driving all night. He doesn't have a delivery until later. He's trying to reset his hours, and you woke him up. Or the other side of it is you call a carrier that is tracking on some app-based tracking piece that has done all of his tracking throughout, and he's asking, why are you calling me? I'm tracking. Like, what else do you want from me, kind of thing, right? And it creates this bad environment for the carrier. And so I think check calls in themselves are one of those nasty, nasty things that have kind of sat out there in the brokerage space that has always been something that everybody tried to solve, right? We had app-based tracking, we have ELD tracking, we have cameras now. We have all this stuff that's supposed to help us so that we know what the location of a driver is. And we still struggle with this piece. And so what typically happens is the carrier sales manager comes in and says, where the heck's my truck? Call right now. I want to find out where he's at. And it creates this bad environment versus relying on the technology in the background. So check calls to me, I'm a huge believer in the umbrella approach. And I think it got mentioned, right? Set up the workflow to allow the system to essentially tell you if there is an issue or not. Exception management is much more easy to do than actual engaging on every single one, right? And I think there's certain pieces inside of that when you do need a call, right? If he's making a delivery and you need to validate a POD or you need to validate clean bills, whatever the case may be, there may be that component inside of it. But simply calling for the sake of calling, I think that ship has sailed. And we have to be able to utilize the technology to tell us when there is an issue and allow us to engage on that piece more so than just making the call. And so when you start to think about it in that manner, where, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to use certain pieces in the technology that's going to feed into the system, and it's going to allow me to see location on that. And it's going to allow me to engage with my customer, because really the piece on this is I need to know where my freight is. So my customer knows that I know where my freight is so that I can engage with my customer if they ask me where my freight is. I think all of those pieces that go into the system then turn around and have pieces that allow you to identify where the break in that communication is. Did the app turn off? Is the driver not downloading the app? Is there something going on? Do I need to engage with that? That's a much better way to go surgical into the check call versus just doing the blast check calls just because I need to make 100 check calls today and find out where these folks are. The second piece that I will say on that is most check calls that are done aren't done with the level of certainty that you actually need to put that check call into the right location. What do I mean by that? What do we typically do on the check call? We try to call the driver doesn't pick up. We call the dispatcher says he's in Sioux Falls. Great, I write down Sioux Falls. Driver may not be in Sioux Falls, but dispatcher told me he's in Sioux Falls, so I'm gonna go with that. I tell the customer that. Customer says there's no way he's in Sioux Falls based on when he left. That creates a bad experience. So you have to allow for the technology to do what it needs to do and then go surgical into that piece when you actually need a human to interact with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what impact did you see that have on your team specifically on that operation?
Yeah, it cleans up the operation in general, right? So instead of taking hours upon hours to make these check calls and creating that inefficiency, it now allows us to make those quick check calls, identify what's going on, update the customer as needed, engage with the carrier as needed, and then move on to the things that are most important, right? Which is finding new carriers, figuring out better margin, engaging with more customers. All of those things that go with that allows us to keep that stuff the focus versus just making a check call for the sake of making it to prove that we did a check call every 15 minutes.
It's a common theme we're hearing today, right? Small operational improvements can create massive leverage for your company over time. Gentlemen, as we begin to wrap up, any thoughts as we wrap this one up?
I'd like to wrap it up with talking a little bit about the modern broker is kind of the theme that we've been talking about here, and how, as a modern broker, taking advantage of the technology tools that are available to us and spending that time to improve your process. Be strategic about your business, and don't let those gaps become problems as you grow or evolve or change. Make sure you're spending a little bit of time in your week or your month to go and take a look at processes that maybe are tried and true, and revisit them and see, where can I do better? Where can I improve this a little bit more and evolve my brokerage? This is an area that you can spend time, and that time will pay dividends. And as we listen to Dave, I love how much passion Dave has around the check calls. It really helps illustrate that point of the check call process is evolving. A few years ago, it was a lot harder to get drivers to use app-based tracking. Today, it's a little bit easier. And in a couple years, it may be a little different as we see other tools that are cameras on the road that are helping us as well. And taking advantage of those tools, make sure you're using them the right way so that you can evolve your business and keep moving. Don't stay still, because if you do, everybody else is going to pass right by you.
Dave, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think the piece that I would just tell folks is take the time to sit down and just ask yourself the question, what am I doing every day that's the exact same, and why am I doing it? And if the answer is, well, that's the way that we started and that's the way that it's kind of always been, you probably want to engage in a different manner, right? you don't have to turn around and boil the ocean. I think that when you start to look at things, there's small little tweaks here and there that can be huge from a ability to grow a brokerage. And I think you have to look at those small pieces that are being done the same way every day in the same exact environment and see if there's a different way, a better way, or something else that maybe supports that and supports your ability to not have to do it all the time. It's not just the mundane, it's the daily stuff that you find yourself knocking out on a daily basis, and it just becomes busy work. Why am I doing this, and what can I do to make this a little bit better? But those small tweaks are going to be huge in the grand scheme of things, right? The old adage is if I get 1% better every single day, naturally I'm 365% better at the end of the year. It's things like that I think a lot of brokerages have to kind of take on and have that as their mantra going forward. And then the last piece that I'll do, if you are doing things based on a spreadsheet, or somebody has a spreadsheet with anything in it, carriers, rates, lanes, that's probably a good place to start. So that's what I'll leave you with.
I love it. And as we, start to wrap up too, I hope the audience leaves with just a few things in mind. First, many of these operational gaps in brokerages aren't dramatic problems, as these gentlemen have said multiple times today. They're just small inefficiencies that can get normalized over time. But when you step back and look at them collectively, they can have a significant impact on all your speed, margin, and the ability to scale. Secondly, the brokerages that aren't really separating themselves right now, they're not necessarily working harder. They've just built systems and workflows like we've discussed today that allow them to move faster and make better decisions and operate with more clarity. So hopefully today gave you a few ideas to think about as you evaluate your own operations moving forward. And if there were any questions you didn't feel comfortable asking in the chat, or if you'd like to talk more about anything we discussed today, we at TIE would absolutely love to connect with you right after this. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate the conversation. For Walter and Dave, my name's Nate, and we'll see you in the next one.